Hi everyone, my name is Julia Ajello and I'm a senior biology major and I will be talking about my project where I studied sexual selection in plants. These beautiful flowers behind me are my study species Brassica rapa, which are annual plants that grow relatively quickly, so they're perfect for studying in a laboratory setting. I will be talking about sexual selection in plants in my experiment that I conducted where I found no evidence of sexual selection in Brassica rapa, a hermaphroditic plant. In this case, the word hermaphrodite means an organism that has both reproductive organs and are able to produce mature gametes of both biological sexes. This definition does not apply to humans and it is not the same as intersex. As such, I will try to say this word sparingly since it does have a negative connotation, and instead I will say an organism with both male and female function. My project is mainly about sexual selection, but I think it's important to discuss the differences between natural and sexual selection. Genetic diversity serves as a tool in which natural selection acts on, and traits that increase an individual's fitness are selected for. Individuals better adapted to their environment will survive and pass on their genes. Sexual selection, on the other hand, involves the selection of traits that increase an individual's chance at reproducing. These can include traits such as bright feathers, colorful tails, and big horns. There are a few different ways in which sexual selection can occur. The first is through intrasexual selection, which involves two males fighting or competing, so it is often dubbed male-male competition. The males can either compete by having bigger and brighter displays that attract the attention of females, such as the male peacock pictured, or they can physically fight for the female by use of their weapons, which can be horns or antlers. Intersexual selection involves the selection in traits by one sex by the other sex. Typically, females are the ones selecting traits, so this is often called female choice. Traits that are selected for in this manner are those that will make the female's offspring more competitive. When Darwin first posited the idea of sexual selection, his definition did not include plants or so-called lower animals, since it was believed that they could not perform tasks relating to sexual selection. The apparent animal bias is seen when Darwin wrote, "Lower animals have too imperfect senses and much too low mental powers to appreciate each other's beauty or other attractions or to feel rivalry." In The Descent of Man and Selection in Relation to Sex in 1871. It took many decades for research on sexual selection to reach plants. Many argue that processes relating to sexual selection can be found in plants, but they often appear very different. Like I said, the same processes that occur in animals still appear in plants, they just look different. For instance, male-male competition takes the form of pollen competition since pollen actually house the sperm. Pollen compete against one another to reach the ovum of a plant through their pollen tubes. The faster an individual pollen grain can produce pollen tubes, the higher chance they have at fertilization. Pollen size and shape also influence their ability to cling to pollinators and to reach a flower. Female choice still occurs, but the mechanisms are much harder to see. Pollen grains can be dismissed if they're not favorable, for instance, through the use of incompatibility genes. Flowers are also perfect examples of secondary sexual characteristics. They attract pollinators, and the more pollinators they attract, the higher reproductive success they will have. There are two special traits that plants have that really complicate the matter of sexual selection. First, plants rely on pollinators to distribute pollen to other plants. This seemingly takes out many choices and actions done by the plant since pollinators are now doing them. However, there are many traits of plants that influence pollinator preference for certain flowers. Plants with larger flowers and nectar rewards will be targeted by pollinators more, and even flower color and plant location can affect pollinator preference. The second trait that many plants possess is having both male and female function. This can occur either by possessing separate male and female flowers on the same plant, or by having flowers that possess both male and female function. Since male and female function are present, sexual selection can occur in much the same way as it does in organisms with separate biological sexes. One big difference is evident, however, in organisms that possess both male and female function. Certain parts of a plant affect both male and female function. Flowers, for instance, deal with pollen, which is directly related to the male function of a plant. However, once the pollen is deposited on the stigma of a plant, the female function is now affected. In my project, I wanted to determine if male-male competition and female choice affected the reproductive fitness of the plant, that is, how many seeds each plant produced. In order to do so, I germinated brassica rapa seeds and grew them in the College of Worcester greenhouse. Once flowers were produced, I performed 192 hand crosses to pollinate the flowers. This involved taking the anthers off of randomly selected paternal plants and collecting them in a tube. The tubes contained anthers from 1 plant or 5 plants in order to determine if female choice could take place. A toothpick was swirled in the pollen and used to pollinate other flowers. The toothpicks were swirled in the pollen for different amounts of time in order to pick up different amounts of pollen. The higher the pollen load, the more competition would exist between the pollen. A hemocytometer, which is used to count blood cells, was used to count pollen in order to determine the average number of pollen grains that were in low and high pollen load groups. After the flowers were pollinated, seeds were produced and counted as an indication of reproductive fitness. The number of seeds produced in each treatment group were compared, as well as the number of seeds produced by each maternal plant. We also wanted to see if treatment group or maternal plant can determine the probability of a plant producing at least one seed. This is a box plot that I created in order to examine the number of seeds produced in each of my treatment groups. The x-axis indicates the treatment group, while the y-axis is the number of seeds produced. 4 different treatment groups were used. Group 1 low indicates that 1 sire was used with a low pollen load. 1 high indicates 1 sire again, but with a high pollen load. Group 5 low indicates the use of 5 sires with a low pollen load, and finally Group 5 high had 5 sires with a high pollen load. Treatment group did not significantly affect the number of seeds produced, and the average number of seeds produced was 7.904 seeds. This is another example of a box plot that I created that shows the number of seeds produced by each maternal plant used. The x-axis indicates which of the 12 maternal plants we're looking at, and the y-axis is the number of seeds that were produced on each plant. 12 plants were used to conduct the crosses on, and it was found that maternal plant does significantly affect the number of seeds produced. It was surprising that pollen competition did not affect the reproductive fitness of the plant. Many studies have found that pollen competition not only increased the number of seeds that were produced, but they also increased seed weight and germination time. Pollen competition has not been found, however, to increase fruit set. Female choice is known to increase the fitness of a plant. An example of one such method is the incompatibility gene that plants possess. These genes don't allow the fertilization of a plant by pollen that is from a closely related plant. Females can also induce neighboring males to release more pollen so that a large variety of pollen can be chosen from. It was surprising that female choice in my study did not increase the reproductive fitness of the plants. One interesting find from my study is that maternal plant did affect the reproductive fitness of the plant. This could be due to a phenomenon known as maternal effect, in which the environment and phenotype of the maternal plant impacts the phenotype of the offspring. It is not known if it was the environment of the maternal plant, the genes of the maternal plant, or a combination of both that affected the reproductive fitness of the plant. However, it is quite clear that maternal plant did have some sort of effect. That's it for my project, and thank you for watching.